Hello, and welcome to Real Cheating Story. I was down in the basement, working on finishing the recreation room ID promised my 15-year-old daughter, Janet. I had already completed the ceiling and walls, and I'd closed in a section under the stairs for some extra storage. Now, I was laying down the indoor-outdoor carpet that I brought home last night. I had all the time I needed to work on it, since my wife, Jamie, was in Cleveland visiting her mother. I had the entire house to myself today since Janet was sleeping over at one of her high school friends' houses. I'd spoken with her friend's mother, who assured me that she and her husband would be home at all times. They were good people and friends, so it was okay with me. I thought back to Sunday night, the evening before Jamie left. She had been angry with me, as usual, and wouldn't talk much about her visit. She simply said she needed some time to herself and would be gone for 2 weeks. Jamie hadn't been working since she was let go during a cutback at the bank about 2 years ago, but since I earned a good income, there was no need for her to work. She decided to stay home for a while. I'd hoped the time off would help her relax and maybe help us repair some of the growing gaps in our marriage. So far, though, it hadn't been of much help. My name is Jim Schwan. I'm 50 years old and a partner at Harris, Schwan, and Wilson Attorneys. Joe Harris and I founded the practice here in St. Louis almost 20 years ago, and Margaret Wilson joined us 5 years later. We specialized in corporate law, and the practice was very successful. I hadn't been in court much in recent years, since we had a core of talented young lawyers hungry and eager to prove their worth to our firm. They all wanted to become partners, but since we had only added 1 or 2 partners in the past 17 years, they fought all the harder for any opportunity. I mentored them, guiding them through the pitfalls of corporate law, and then let them prove themselves. Margaret handled the client-facing side, managing the lawyers like a real powerhouse, but everyone seemed happy with their time at our firm. It was definitely a great experience to put on their resumes. Jamie and I married 19 years ago. It was a second marriage for both of us, and we had a daughter together, Janet. My first wife had passed away in a car accident, and we had no children together. Jamie had a son from her first marriage, who is now 24 and lives with his father. He's married with kids of his own now, and Jamie sometimes talks to him on the phone, though, to my knowledge, she's never visited him. She rarely talks about him, so I eventually let it drop. We had Janet 16 years ago, and she was our last, as Jamie had complications during her delivery that required a hysterectomy. This marked the end of her childbearing years, but we were both okay with that. We did go through the process of retrieving and saving some of Jim's biological material before Jamie's procedure, but we eventually let it expire without taking further action. Janet was enough for both of us, and at the time, we didn't feel the need for more children. Besides, our marriage was going through a rough patch, making it difficult to make such decisions. Jim's parents had lived in Cleveland, and we used to visit them twice a year as a family. Occasionally, Jamie would go on her own or take Janet, though it had been over a year since either Janet or I had been there, if my memory served me correctly. Jamie had gone to see her parents shortly after she was let go from her job, but rather than things improving as I had hoped, her mood seemed to worsen. When she eventually said she wanted to spend some time with her mother, I thought a little distance might be good for both of us, so I readily agreed. I missed her after just a few days, but she must not have felt the same way. She stayed a full 10 days, extending her visit from 1 week to stay over an additional weekend. With my parents deceased and being an only child, Jamie's parents, Jan and Ruth, were the closest thing I had to family. However, my relationship with her mother was challenging, as she and I had never really connected. Jamie, too, was more attached to her mother than her father, which sometimes caused tension. I liked her dad, and he and I became friends, keeping in touch over the phone or by email, but that had gradually declined over the past 2 years. I assumed that her mother's attitude toward me was part of the reason, affecting my friendship with her father as well. Still, I never resented Jamie's visits with her parents. This time, though, it wasn't an ordinary visit. It followed a period of almost a year of very strained relations between Jamie and me, which had worsened after her last trip home. Since she returned, she had been increasingly distant and critical. It seemed that almost every day there was something she wanted me to do, tasks and demands, along with harsh words if I didn't act immediately. It was hard to believe, but things became even more difficult following her last trip. With Janet, however, Jamie's behavior remained consistent. Janet didn't see her mother's outbursts directed at me, so I decided not to intervene or react, trying to keep the peace. Over time, it became almost a habit to simply listen quietly to Jamie's criticism and walk away. She had grown used to doing what she wanted when she wanted, and I allowed it to avoid conflict. I even let it go on in front of Janet or when we were with friends. I knew people thought I was being passive, but it was my decision. Perhaps it was a mistake, but it was too late to worry about that now. Jamie's approach to this trip was typical. After several days of hinting, she made the decision to go and simply informed me. She would spend 2 weeks with her parents. No discussion, no questions about my own plans or any challenges her absence might bring. She dismissed my request for an explanation and left me with a list of things I needed to know about Janet's activities, but nothing more. The night before she left, she packed her bags and went to bed early. In the morning, she called a cab to the airport, making it clear my help wasn't needed. She left without even saying goodbye. As for our intimacy, it had dwindled to nothing. We hadn't shared that closeness in at least 2 years, certainly not since she lost her job, which was 18 months ago. I know it had been at least 6 months since we had any intimacy before Jamie made her last trip home, and even longer since I had tried to discuss it. When I attempted to initiate anything, she would get up and go into the spare room, leaving me feeling frustrated and angry. The more I pushed for communication, the more she resisted. Eventually, I decided to give up. One night, I mentioned some options to Jamie, hoping to talk things through, but instead, I received a heated response about what she would do if she suspected I was unfaithful. When I brought up the possibility of divorce due to emotional neglect, she laughed and pointed out the potential damage to my public image if it were revealed in court that she had shut me out of the bedroom. This reaction prompted an emotional outburst from me. I asked why she would stay with me if she clearly disliked me, wanted nothing to do with me, and preferred to be alone as much as possible. To my surprise, Jamie burst into tears and cried for what felt like an eternity. When she finally calmed down, she told me that she loved me, always had, and always would. She explained that she was under so much stress and confusion that she didn't understand why she reacted the way she did. She begged for my patience and promised to seek help. Her pleas were so heartfelt and sincere that I was taken aback, remaining seated on the edge of the bed as she took her clothes and moved to the spare room. I was still feeling confused the next morning when she reverted to her usual critical behavior. This brings us to today. Jamie had been gone for a day and a half, and I had been reflecting on our relationship for some time. I began to believe that the only option left was to file for divorce. Janet was old enough to handle it and would probably be happier, especially since she often expressed her disdain for how her mother treated me. I had tried to hold out for Janet's sake, but perhaps now I had no other choice. I felt young enough to believe I still had a life to live, and I needed more than Jamie was willing to give. The only way to find that was to let her go. The problem was that I still loved her, despite her behavior and how she treated me. I believed that a divorce would hurt me more than it would her. These thoughts occupied my mind as I carried some boxes down from our bedroom to the newly finished storage space under the stairs. Jamie had insisted that I clear out our closet when I made room downstairs, and I was pleased to find so much free space. Now seemed like a good time to move things. This way, I could do the work without her nagging. I was almost at the bottom of the steps on my third trip when my foot slipped, and I dropped the 2 boxes I was carrying. I watched them tumble as I grabbed the railing to avoid falling. They hit the floor, splitting open and spilling their contents all over the new carpet. Fortunately, there were no liquids or powders in the boxes, so it seemed fine. I went down, got 2 empty boxes, and began reboxing the items. That's when I discovered a packet that seemed to be letters held together with a blue ribbon. I had never seen them before, which piqued my curiosity. I set them aside, assuming they were love letters from one of Janet's boyfriends. After putting the remaining items in the boxes, I pushed them toward the storage area under the stairs. I made 2 more trips before all the designated boxes were stored away. I closed the panel doors and collapsed on the floor, leaning against one of the walls with my feet stretched out in front of me, trying to catch my breath. As my breathing returned to normal, I noticed the stack of letters and pulled them closer. I untied the ribbon and pulled out the first letter. It was addressed to my darling Jamie. Immediately, I felt a mix of interest and anger. I had never written anything like this to Jamie at any point in our marriage or even before. My breathing, which had calmed down, started to quicken again, not from fatigue, but from anxiety. I unfolded the letter and noted that it had been read many times. The creases were deep, and it was almost in tatters. Clearly, this letter was cherished by Jamie. I carefully held it and began to read the words it contained. Asterisk, my darling Jamie, I have been thinking of the last night we spent together. I can't get you out of my mind. You drove me crazy. That was almost more than I could bear. And when you stopped, I wanted to cry. The way you made love to me was blissful. I know I won't stop thinking of you as you leave me to go back to your loveless marriage. Why won't you leave him and come to me for all time? You know my story. I'm also in a loveless marriage, and I would divorce my wife in an instant if you would say you would come to me. Please, my Jamie, reconsider. Tell me you are coming back to me. With all my love, Walter. The shock I felt was so intense that I think I sat there for almost an hour before regaining my senses. I looked again at the letter and scanned the words, but they remained the same. My wife had been unfaithful to me with someone named Walter Matthews, according to the return address. I quickly checked the letter for a date and found it was written 3 days after my wife returned from her visit to her mother a year ago. I grabbed the stack and pulled out another letter. This one described a different encounter, mentioning an intimate moment in the front seat of his car in the parking lot of a club. She had gone down on him at his request, and he had clearly enjoyed it. I couldn't help but think how much I would have appreciated such moments, but she had always been dismissive of them with me. I wondered if she had felt the same way about this experience. As I scanned through the rest, they all seemed to come from that same trip. It appeared she had met him midway through her visit and decided to extend her stay to spend the last weekend with him. Apparently, Walter had tried to convince her to leave me, but I knew her well enough to understand she wouldn't want to deal with the complications of starting over on her own. Knowing her, she probably insisted that he divorce his wife first before she would consider doing the same. I was left questioning whether she had any genuine feelings for him beyond mere attraction, the very desire she had denied me. I let the last of the letters slip from my fingers as the reality of her betrayal settled heavily on my consciousness. Sitting in the basement, I reflected on everything she had done. It was clear from the letters, and the fact that she had kept them, that the infidelity had occurred during her trip to visit her mother, as evidenced by the dates on the letters. I wondered how she had managed to keep these letters hidden from me. Going back through the stack, I found a larger envelope with her mother's return address. This meant her mother was aware of what she had done and who she had done it with. I felt no surprise at that revelation. It was all beginning to make sense. I carried the stack of letters upstairs and placed them on the table, my mind racing as I contemplated my next steps. I now knew that my marriage was over, and I would no longer be the target of her anger and demands. Up until now, I had been holding out hope that she would remember the love we once had, but it was clear she didn't. Her behavior reflected her contempt for me and a lack of concern for my well-being. She was in love with someone else, but was too afraid to leave me for him. Plus, considering he was also married, I wondered if she believed he would actually leave his wife. I considered several alternatives, but kept returning to the fact that I could no longer stay with Jamie, especially now that I knew she didn't love me. I had no desire to endure any more of her contempt. I knew I should wait and talk to her, but I lacked the patience for that. This was the end, and it had to stop now. I resolved that by the next day, I would enlist the help of a private investigator to uncover what I needed to know. Until then, I would begin planning a life without Jamie. Before I did that, I had a couple of things to handle. The first was to securely store all of the letters from Walter. Those letters were a clear admission of infidelity, and as a lawyer, I knew how to use them. Jamie would eventually notice their absence, but until then, I had no reason to let her know how much I understood. I also wanted to protect my impressionable daughter from seeing them. I was concerned she might get the wrong idea and emulate her mother's choices. Once I ensured the letters were safely stored away, I began to formulate my options. 3 days later, on a Thursday, Jamie called me. It was the only call I had received from her over the past week while she was away, and it was simply to ask me to send her a couple of things from the desk. I asked why she didn't just wait until she was home, but she responded with one of her sarcastic remarks about my lack of concern for her. I reluctantly agreed, still waiting for my investigator's report before saying anything. I had contacted him the day after I discovered the letters, and he had been gathering information for a few days already, but I hadn't heard back from him yet. During our call, Jamie didn't say much. She asked once about how Janet was doing, and then hung up without any words of affection. Just like her. That was the last call of that week, and into the next week. I expected nothing less from her. At my request, the investigator had flown to Cleveland to look into DMV records, city tax records, and anything else pertinent to identify Walter. When I entered my office that Friday before confronting her, he was waiting for me. I told my secretary not to disturb us and closed my door. He opened a file and began to fill me in. Okay, Mr. Schwan, I think I got what you need. His name's Walter Matthews, and he's 45 years old, married to Mary Matthews. He has 5 kids. Can you believe the oldest is 21, and the others are between 18 and 12? There are twins in that mix. He and your wife spent the weekend in a motel just off the interstate, staying there most of the day and all night. He owns a car dealership and spends most of his time there during the day. Seems to be doing pretty well for himself. He has a nice home in the BBS, probably worth $500,000 or more. Even the older kid is in grad school, and the rest are living at home with their mother, who doesn't work and takes care of the house. He shoved a picture toward me, showing a tall man with dark hair, well-dressed and fairly good-looking. More on the thin side than bulky. I stared at it for a few seconds before pushing it back. What else did you find? No debts to speak of, just the mortgage on the house at over $200,000. Business records show regular tax payments and reports of business income. He pulls down about $200,000 a year before taxes, not too shabby. The rest is routine stuff. His address, phone number, names and ages of his kids, and his wife. I have copies of his tax returns for the past 3 years, and some comments about him from his neighbors. He seems to be well-liked and not a troublemaker. Oh, and one other thing you might find interesting. He has been visiting a local establishment regularly. I have receipts from his last 5 visits, showing he goes at least once a week, sometimes more. The owner says he's a steady customer and causes no trouble at all. He prefers younger companions, but they're all legal, so no help there. One thing occurred to me. Did he visit last week or this week? That was when Jimmy was there, like clockwork on Tuesday afternoon. Like I told you before, he spent the weekend with your wife at a local hotel, and the rest of the time he was home with his wife. He only went out one night during the week, and that was Wednesday when he met your wife at a restaurant. They sat together, looking very affectionate, lots of touching and such. Then he left alone. Your wife drove home and stayed there. I did overhear their conversation, though. She was making plans to meet him again that weekend. I thanked him for his work, took possession of the file, and gave him a chit to ensure he got paid. I sat back and read the report in full just to get an idea of this man. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wanted revenge on him, especially since he would be responsible for taking care of my daughter. I had to leave Jamie alone. Making her my ex-wife would have to do. It was the Friday before she was due to come back, and I was jotting down some notes of things I wanted to do when the phone rang. I was so engrossed in what I was doing that I picked it up without thinking and answered with an abrupt yes. Hello, it's me. That's a stupid way to answer the phone. Where's Jan? I want to talk to her for a minute. I just stared at the phone in my hand. Was this the woman who called herself my wife? For the first time, I realized how she talked to me. Abrupt, dismissive, full of contempt and anger. Well, now it ends. I had no desire to string her along and play with her like a cat with a mouse. Even though I was a lawyer and we made a living manipulating people with words, I wanted none of that. I wanted to hurt her, to make her suffer, to let her feel the pain I felt as I read those letters and listened to that report. She's not here. Call back later. I slammed the phone down in anger. Screw her. Let her feel my contempt. It was only seconds before the phone rang again. I let it ring for 5 or 6 rings before picking it up and answering the same way. Yes? What the hell do you think you're doing hanging up on me? How dare you? Fury in her voice. Good. At least she was capable of some emotion. I slammed the phone down again, chuckling to myself. I waited, but this time the phone didn't ring again, so I went back to my lists. It was almost 10 o'clock that evening when the phone rang. I checked the caller ID and saw that it was Jamie. I was curious to see how she would handle things this time, so I answered after 5 rings with my usual, "Yes? Hello, Jim. It's Jamie. Are you feeling better now? You seemed to be in a bad mood when I called earlier. I decided to wait for a while and hope you would be in a better place now." "I wasn't in a bad mood earlier, Jamie. I just didn't want to talk to you when you were making demands. Your constant lack of respect makes me angry, that's all. What do you want?" There was a short silence before she replied. "I'm sorry you got that impression. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just in a hurry and wanted to talk to January. I'm sorry you thought I was making demands." "Fine. What do you want, Jamie? Why are you calling? I told you Jan wasn't here. What part of that didn't you understand? Calm down. I'm not angry. Now that you're being respectful, what do you mean, why am I calling? You're my husband, and I wanted to talk to you, that's all. Why wouldn't I call you when I'm away from home? Don't you miss me at all?" "Actually, Jamie, it's been sort of peaceful here since you've been gone. No yelling, no demands, no disrespect. Jan is happy and spending a lot of time with her friends, and I'm doing what I like without anyone criticizing me. And when I go to bed, I have the whole bed to myself. It's not as if I'm missing anything from you. Not for a couple of years now, so no, I don't miss you. It's been very nice with you gone." More silence. "Are you still there, Jamie? Or are you done?" "I'm here. I guess I'm just surprised at the way you're talking to me. Have you been drinking? You sound very strange." "Not a drop, not even a beer, just some coffee and a few crackers. Got to watch the weight, you know. Well, if I didn't know better, I would think you're happy I'm gone. I was hoping you would want me to hurry home, but maybe I'll just stay a while longer since you don't miss me. Would you like that, Jim?" Now there was the Jamie I knew and loved. Soft words delivered with hints of sarcasm. She was trying to goad me into agreeing to extend her trip, but now I was going to steer this conversation my way. "Well, I'll tell you what, Jamie. Why don't you and good old Walter take a few extra days, just like last time? You wanted to visit your mother, after all. He did miss your company, didn't he? So rather than rush back to your loveless marriage, why not make him happy a bit longer?" I slammed down the phone again, but this time I pulled the line from the wall. I heard the phones in the bedroom and the din start ringing, but they were too far away to be any bother. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and turned that off as well. I wanted nothing more to do with her right now, and her silence was the best part of her being gone. I was being honest when I told her it was pleasant with her away. I thought back over the conversation, and the only good thing I could take from it was her suggestion that I go out and enjoy myself. That sounded like a great idea, and one I could certainly handle. I went upstairs to change and get ready for my night out. I shaved, put on some aftershave, and looked at myself in the mirror. Not bad really for a guy my age. I was still in good shape, working out at the club once or twice a week while doing business. My hair was almost white but still full and worn long, and my stomach was not too terrible, just a little bulge contained by my belt. Not bad at all. I walked back downstairs, checked the voicemail, and deleted all the messages from Jamie. I called Janet, the sleepover, and let her know I would be out but told her to call me if she needed anything. It would be turned off, but I would check for messages later. She assured me I had no need to worry about her and said she wanted to stay until lunch the next day. I told her about her mom wanting to stay a few extra days, and she seemed pleased. I signed off with love and received hers in return. Just before I left, I took off my wedding ring, put it on a piece of string, and hung it from the mirror in our bathroom. While I didn't expect Jamie to leave her situation right away and rush back to her husband, when she did decide to come home, I wanted this to be her greeting. More importantly, I didn't want to see any reminders of her tonight while I was out. Tonight was for me. I took one last look around, remembering happier times, and then left. I drove across town to a place I hadn't visited in a few years, a bar that catered to singles and was known as the spot to meet new people. I knew the owner, having represented him once in a lawsuit against his establishment. I won, and Carmine promised me free drinks for life. Tonight, I was going to try to make a dent in that promise. I was pleased with the greeting I got when I walked in to see the place almost full. Carmine saw me, raised his hands in a victory signal, and said something to one of the women at the bar. She quickly got up and held her stool until I arrived, bowing with a flourish to show me it was my seat before walking away. Well, if it ain't my main man, Jimbo. How you been? Jimbo, it's good to see you. What are you drinking? How's it going? Carmine, long time. How about you bring me a bottle of the good stuff and just leave it here? I want to get seriously hammered, and I knew you were the only one I could trust to keep me from getting mugged afterward. You got nothing to worry about. Tell Carmine what's the problem. She is cheating on me. Carmine just found out today that she's been seeing some guy in Cleveland for over a year. She and her mother made a fool out of me. Real pieces of work, those two. When in Rome, you talk the talk that the Romans understood. Carmine was good people, blunt, plain-spoken, and to the point. He set a bottle of good scotch in front of me, poured the first glass, and placed it beside a bottle of beer, telling me to share my story. He waved away another customer trying to get his attention and signaled for someone else to cover the bar. I started to talk, and 10 minutes later, I was done. Carmine just nodded as if he knew it all along and stood up. Just go ahead and drink down your troubles. If you need me to do anything, just whistle. You hear? In the meantime, drink. They'll watch over you. He moved away, and I sipped some more scotch. I had been drinking slowly but steadily for some time before I became aware of someone sitting next to me. When I felt a hand brush my thigh, I looked up to see a woman sitting close. One hand was on her drink, and the other was resting on my leg. I looked at her hand and then at her, finding her worth another glance. She was blonde, her hair a bright golden color, her eyes as blue as the sky. Her face was gorgeous but showed signs of maturity. I guess she was about 45 or even 50. This was a real woman, not a kid. Her face had character and intelligence. Hello there. Who are you? I said, always quick with the snappy words. Just a trait of us lawyers. Hello yourself. My name's Rachel English, and you are? My name is Jim, and you are very beautiful, Rachel. Her smile was worth more nice words, and I wanted to keep her smiling. I searched my tired brain for more. What is a beautiful woman like you doing alone in a place like this? I can't believe you have to come here to find someone. Any man would give his right arm to be seen with you. I was met with a huge smile, but it suddenly faded, replaced by a sadness that couldn't ruin her beautiful face. But it did make me sad too. I wanted to make it go away. Why so sad? You shouldn't be sad. I looked down at her hand, still resting on my thigh, and saw the wedding ring. Your husband cheating on you, like my wife? No, far from it. My husband was killed in Iraq. He was a colonel, and his convoy was ambushed. He died along with most of his men. It happened 2 years ago. I miss him so much. She bowed her head for a few seconds, but when she looked up, her eyes were clear. They say time heals all wounds. For her sake, I hoped it was true. I talked with her some more, and after almost 2 hours, we left together. I was too drunk to drive, but she wasn't. We ended up at her place, and while I would have loved to brag about how well the night went, I think I passed out. The last thing I remembered was her pulling my pants off, and while I was interested in what might happen, I apparently lacked the will. I woke the next morning in a strange bed, alone and confused. It took me a minute to remember where I was before I saw the beautiful woman from last night holding a tray with coffee and 2 cups. She was wearing a thin negligee that revealed more than it covered. I lost interest in the coffee quickly, and when she put the tray down, I reached for her. She came willingly, and the next thing I knew, we were sharing a kiss that seemed to last forever. Her lips were soft and warm, and we got the hang of it quickly, losing ourselves in the moment. We shared a tender moment before we both fell against each other, somewhat embarrassed. I looked at her and saw she was grinning at me. Well, wasn't that something special? I feel like I'm back in high school, she said, almost laughing at the look on my face. Yes, it certainly was. It's good to know I'm not the only one to get swept away so easily. I smiled back at her, noticing again how beautiful she was. Do you come to Carmen's often? I can't believe a woman as beautiful as you can go to a bar and not have been with someone before this. No man could resist you. I was serious, and she saw that. She looked deep into my eyes before looking away. I'll tell you the truth, but you have to let me finish before you say anything. Do you promise? I promise. Tell me. Carmine called me here at home. He's my brother. He told me to come over and meet a really nice man. He said you were in trouble and that I might be able to help. She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. She looked like a young girl, so beautiful and alive. When I got there, you were already pretty far gone, but the more I talked to you, the more I liked you, and I began to feel something inside me again. That's why I invited you to my bed. I wanted someone to share an intimate connection with for the first time since my husband died, and you were that someone. It was everything I had hoped for. I was quiet as I looked into her deep blue eyes. She was being honest with me, and I could see that what she did was out of genuine desire, not pity or kindness. I had helped her as much as she helped me. I told her that and more as we sat there and talked. I wanted to know more about this woman, and we made plans to stay in touch. She understood my situation and knew I would be occupied with that for some time, but she offered me her shoulder to lean on or her company anytime I wanted it. I laughed but accepted in complete seriousness. We shared another meaningful moment before I got dressed and headed home. It was just past noon when I arrived back, having had Rachel drive me to pick up my car at Carmen's bar. The place seemed deserted, and once inside, I confirmed that fact. I wasn't surprised to find that Jamie hadn't rushed home to try to save a doomed marriage, but I was a little disappointed. I had thought that 19 years would mean a little more to her. Apparently not. I walked into the kitchen to fix myself some coffee when I noticed the answering machine light blinking. I checked the log and saw 10 calls, all from Jim's cell phone. There was one more, and that one was from a number I recognized as Jim's father. We talked often enough for me to remember the number. That one was interesting enough for me to play. Jim, it's Paul. When you get this, please give me a call. Jamie and her mother have gone up to the cabin for a few days at my urging. Jamie wanted to come home at once, but I talked her out of it. They both have a lot of thinking to do, as you might guess. So call me on this number. It's my cell. Take care. Interesting. I would return his call as soon as I was ready. In the meantime, I listened to several of the messages from Jamie, all variations of her yelling about me, not knowing what I was talking about, and generally demeaning me. The last two were less demanding and more desperate, but none made any impression on me. I deleted them all. I checked to see if Jan was home, but there was no sign of her. She did say she'd be back sometime in the afternoon. I suddenly felt hungry and fixed myself a sandwich and a cold beer to fill my stomach and ease the alcohol hangover. I ate slowly, thinking of this morning with Rachel, and that alone was enough to put me in a good mood. I finished up, took the phone into the family room, and called Paul. Hi, Paul, it's Jim. Returning your call. Jim, I'm glad you called. I know what's going on, and that's why I'm calling. I sent Jamie and her mother to the cabin to get them away from here. I'm furious with both of them, and you know part of why. Well, all I know is that Jamie has been having an affair with some guy named Walter Matthews. It started the last time she was there, or at least I think it did. It may have been earlier than that, and for your information, I believe Ruth knew about it as well, and she was the one who sent his love letters to Jamie here. That's all I know, Paul. Well, yes, that's the bulk of it. I found out by overhearing a conversation between her and her mother that she was going to spend a weekend with him. That's why she called you to tell you she was going to stay a couple of extra days. I was furious with Jamie, but all she did was cry when I yelled at her. She's been crying since your phone call last night. She's been going crazy trying to reach you since then. Her mother was being a pain, telling her she didn't deserve you, that she was smart for finding someone else to replace you, that kind of stuff. I slapped her across the face. It was the first time in our marriage that I've ever hit her. It made me sick, but honestly, Jim, she deserved it. I could hear the pain in Paul's voice as he told me that, but I was also angry, knowing what Ruth did to me. She bore some responsibility for destroying our marriage, but she wouldn't see that as a bad thing. Too bad I didn't see it coming. Too bad Jamie was so easily led down the path of betrayal. It was too easy for her. It shouldn't have been, regardless of how hard her mother pushed. Paul told me he was going to drive up to see them both that night and for his call. He asked if I wanted to talk to Jamie, and I told him no. I had nothing to say to her right now, and perhaps never again. I needed to think about it. He understood, and we hung up. Jan showed up about an hour later, and rather than waste both our time, I told her what I knew about her mother. It wasn't done out of cruelty, but rather out of respect. Jan was growing up so fast, and she had seen what was going on in the marriage. She was the one caught in the middle, and I wanted her to be aware of what was going to happen. She had some decisions to make, and I wanted to prepare her for that. If the marriage ended, she was old enough to decide where she wanted to go. We listed the pros and cons, and she understood it wasn't an emotional decision but one of practicality. She was almost an adult and had to do what was best for her now as well as later. We talked together for hours, and it made me proud to see how she took it and how she handled it. In the end, we both decided it was best for her to remain here at the house with her mother's school meetings, and such would require someone to be free enough to see to her, and I couldn't do that. I promised her that I would always ensure she was cared for and that her education was not jeopardized. It was almost 5 o'clock when the phone rang. Jan took the call, and I heard her when she said, "Mom, how could you?" I decided to let her talk with her mother first and went outside to sit on the porch. I hated for her to have to deal with something like this, but she had her own life to live, and what we did would affect her, so she might as well be part of it. I was still thinking about how I wanted to handle it when she brought the phone to me. "Here, Dad, it's her. I don't want to talk to her again." She had tears in her eyes as she handed me the phone. I wanted to comfort her, but she left quickly, leaving me alone, just as I had her. I watched her go, in no hurry to speak to Jamie. "Hello, Jamie." Just that, and no more. I was already exhausted with this whole situation. It had only been 24 hours, give or take, but it felt like weeks or months of turmoil. Why did you have to tell Jan? Why were you so cruel just to hurt me, just to get back at me? Jamie was back to her old self already. No problem for her, just lashing out at anybody nearby. Never accepting guilt was her motto. Well, I was fed up with it all. Go to hell, you cheating. When you can talk to me decently, call. Otherwise, don't bother to call or come back here. Goodbye. I disconnected and held the phone limply in one hand while I waited to see what she would do. It didn't take long. The phone rang. "Hello." I know I sounded drained, but that's how I felt. "Jim, I apologize. I was just shaken that you told Jan what I did. I don't know why you had to do that. I guess it's because you hate me now, isn't it?" "Actually, Jamie, everything isn't about you. You may not believe me, but why I told her had nothing to do with you. What you did is going to affect her life as well as mine. So I felt she deserved to be treated with the respect that you've denied me all this time. I told her to give her time to learn to deal with it. That's why. And as for your apology, save it." There was a pause as she thought about that. Then came a quiet question. "Do you hate me, Jim?" "No, I don't hate you. To be honest, I have no emotions when I think of you. The past 2 years have just about killed all the love or any emotion I had for you. I guess I do feel some anger when I think of you and him, but I'll get over it. You've done a good job of erasing whatever I had left of us inside me. Would you believe me if I told you that I'm sorry? That I wish it had never happened? I am so sorry that I let it happen. You didn't deserve this. I'm really sorry, Jim." Well, like I say, Jamie, there is just a void inside me that used to be filled with thoughts of you. Now it's empty. You asked me the other night if I missed you. The answer is more and more becoming no, and you're right. You should never have allowed it to happen at all. That's what our marriage vows were about, our promises to each other. Remember saying them, forsaking all others? You broke those vows, and now I have to accept that there's nothing there. And once again, I don't need your apologies. They don't mean anything to me anymore. Please tell me you don't mean that, Jim. Please tell me you don't feel that way. I'll be home as soon as I can, and we can work this out. I know I've done something awful, but I'll make it up to you if you just give me the chance. I don't want to make it work anymore. I would prefer if you just stayed away for a while longer. These last few days have been very peaceful for me. I'm doing quite well without you. Now Janet and I have some decisions to make about her future, and she will do so by herself. I'm not going to influence her. She probably should stay here with you if she can. She's only got a year and a few months left. Jim, you're talking as if it's over between us. Please don't make any decisions like that until I have a chance to talk to you. I know I've messed up big time, but I can make it up to you if you'll only give me a chance. Jim, I realize now that I love you more than I realized. I forgot for a while, but now I remember why I loved you. I do, and I don't want to lose you. Please wait for me, Jim. Wait until I get home. I have no interest in your love for me. Your love means nothing to me, Jamie. I would rather stay away from it for the rest of my life. As for me, this marriage is over. And like I said, Don't bother coming home right away." I hung up quickly, the tears starting to flow when I heard her begin to plead with me. I knew it was just an echo of the love I had for Jamie before she did this to me. That love would die a quick death, but for now, I still had to endure the pain of separation. The phone began to ring almost as soon as I hung up. I glanced at the caller ID to see it was Jamie, and I ignored it. I was done talking to her. I was done with her. That was becoming clearer as the enormity of her betrayal began to sink in. It was almost noon on the following Wednesday when my secretary rang to let me know I had a phone call from my wife. It had been 2 days since I had let her know that I wasn't accepting calls from Jamie, so this was a surprise. I asked her why she had accepted the call, and she said it was forwarded from Margaret Wilson. Margaret? Hell, I had forgotten that Jamie and Margaret were friends. Margaret was a real piece of work and had few friends, but she and Jamie hit it off right from the start. I always wondered why, and now I began to see they were two of a kind. Margaret had been married and divorced 4 times already. Just the role model for my soon-to-be ex. Okay, I'll take it. Not your fault, Susie, thanks. I pushed the button for line 1. Yes, what is it? And this had better be good, Margaret. I'm not going to forget this little betrayal. I knew Margaret was still on the line from the caller ID. Oh, Jim, I had no idea there were problems, but what the hell are you doing? You won't even talk to your wife. She's on when I hang up. Talk to her. Hello, Jamie. What can I do for you? I asked seriously and evenly. You can come home and talk to me. I'm at home, Jim, so please can we talk? Whose home is that, Jamie? Walter Matthews' home? Certainly not our home. You've destroyed that one, haven't you? I heard a muffled sob. So she had decided on tact and begging. Jim, please come home and talk to me. I owe you an explanation, and I promise to give it to you without any lies or excuses. Please, Jim, come home. What do you really want, Jamie? Just to be taken care of while you do whatever you please behind my back? Isn't that what you've been doing for the past 2 years? You treat me poorly, refuse to communicate, make my life a living hell, and then you went to him. You said you were visiting your mother, but you went to him instead. You made plans to spend the weekend with him again, just like last time, and you were going to insult me until I agreed that you should stay longer. You were trying to use me to justify your choices. Was it that much better with him? I was laying it on thick now. The anger that had been building was looking for an outlet, and now that she was here, she was the target. Please, Jim. I guess I deserve that, but you're wrong. You're wrong about Walter and me. I didn't even see him this trip, honest. Jamie, you spent the whole weekend with him at the Dorchester Hotel. And what about Wednesday? Doesn't dinner on Wednesday night count? You made plans to meet over the coming weekend, telling him you were going to convince me to let you stay a few extra days. Sitting close together, touching, and God knows what under the table. Or do you just count the times you were with him as seeing him? I just met him briefly to tell him it was over, that I never wanted to see him again. Honest, Jim, I didn't go anywhere with him. That was the only time I saw him. That's more lies, Jamie. I know what you did. And what about the last trip? Didn't you have a close encounter in the parking lot? Do you deny any of that? Silence. The truth was coming down hard on her now. Keep it coming. I was feeling good. Finally, some retribution. Did you and Walter talk about his kids? How about his twins? Did he mention them and his wife, Margaret? Did you two talk about her? Did you tell him about me? Laughing about how you were pulling the wool over our eyes? The scream from the other end of the line was enough to surprise me. I held the phone away from my ears, but I heard the click telling me we were disconnected. I hung up feeling exhausted, wrung out like a wet rag, limp. I had 2 choices. 1, I could go home and talk to Jamie and let her try to justify what she had done. Or 2, I could begin to make my plans to end this charade of a marriage. Now, while I had the pain and the anger burning inside me, I chose the latter. I called in 2 of my associates, one specializing in divorce, and briefed them on my situation. It was easier than I suspected now that I had begun to look at it as a case, something I had done every day for the past 20 years. My name was on this one, but that was the only thing different about it. They quickly forgot that it was the boss's wife and got down to business. The first thing I wanted was to file suit in Ohio for alienation of affections. It was a rare but legitimate legal charge, and I was going to pursue it to the bitter end. I would probably lose, but that was fine with me. I cared nothing about any money, but I wanted him to answer in court for his behavior, and I wanted his wife and kids to know about it. She would get hurt. I understood that, but she should know what her husband was capable of. She could decide what to do about him. Then I gave the letters to one of my associates and told him to prepare a motion to require a handwriting analysis and confirmation that they came from Mr. Walter Matthews. After reading the top one, he smiled and tucked them safely into his briefcase. He was flying to Cleveland tomorrow to file and get things started. The other gentleman and I outlined a series of actions designed to close accounts, transfer funds to other accounts, conduct an outside audit of my holdings, and estimate their value. We decided how to move certain assets before the audit to protect some major holdings. I signed a power of attorney and sat back, watching him begin the process. These two were relentless when set loose, and that's what I was counting on. Maximum pain for them with minimum loss to me. By the end of the day, things were happening very fast, and I was ready to head home. It was time to begin the process of separating Jamie and me. She started it, but I was going to finish it. As I walked down the hall heading for my car, it occurred to me that when love morphed into hate, there was no limit to the pain that would result. I walked into the house to find Jamie sitting on the couch with Janet in the family room. It was clear that Janet had been crying, and Jamie looked little better. Both turned to me as I entered the room. Janet jumped up, ran to me, and embraced me. She whispered into my ear, "Good luck, Dad. Whatever happens, I love you." I watched her walk away, her head held high, her pace betraying the pain she was in. She was a good girl with a strong will, and she would be fine regardless of what happened. She was nothing like her mother, and that thought gave me peace. I sighed, walked into the room, and sat down in one of the chairs Jamie had picked out when she was in a couples mode. Matching chairs and a couch. I hated both. "Well, Jamie, I'm here. You wanted to talk to me. Tell me why you messed up our lives. Why did you betray Janet and me?" "I don't know. I know that's not an answer, but it's true. I just don't know why I did it. I went home the first time to get away from everything. I had no intention of doing anything but just getting away, and for the first week, that's all I did. Then Mom introduced me to this man. She said he was a friend of hers from church and that he was in a bad marriage, and would I talk to him? She seemed to be very calm now, and I wondered just what she expected me to say that would justify what she did. I had to admit I was curious. We went to dinner that Friday, the night before I was to fly home. We talked. He was very charming and complimented me a lot. He would touch my hand when he said something, and then reach over to push a lock of hair off my face. He was very smooth, and I was swept away. As the evening went on, I found myself attracted to him in ways I had not experienced for a long time. Even with you. I know now that it was very wrong, but by the end of the evening, I wanted him. I wanted him badly. You know, we hadn't been intimate for months before I went home. My drive, I guess you could call it, was almost gone, but that night with him, it came back. He saw that, and he drove me to a motel. We spent the night together. The next day, I called you and told you I was going to stay a couple of extra days. I spent them with Walter in that motel. I listened with an anger growing inside me that was almost white-hot by the time she got to this point. The pain I felt from her betrayal was so strong that I wanted to get up and leave, but I couldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I sat there pretending to be in control and listened. What I wanted to do was lash out at her until she begged me to stop, but only my training as a man stopped me. To this day, I regret that I came home and never told you anything about Walter. I didn't call him or talk to him or write to him afterward, and I tried to forget what I had done. I also never came to you for intimacy either, mainly because I felt you would somehow know that I had been unfaithful. I couldn't risk that. You may not believe me, but I do love you, and am so ashamed of what I've done that I think I might just die." She stopped, tears falling from her eyes, her head bowed in shame. While I believed the shame was real, I believed nothing else. Not her love for me, the reasons for her betrayal, or her fear of my finding out what she did. None of that rang true to me. "Well, that's quite a story, Jamie. Why don't I believe a word of it?" "I'll tell you why. First, you shut me out long before you left, and you were already treating me poorly even then. Second, I know some of the things you did with him, and they were things you would never consider doing with me. Why is that, do you suppose?" Why give to him what you refused me? And you were going to do it again. This time I had you investigated, and I know you met him the first weekend and spent time with him. I also know that Wednesday night you made plans to spend the weekend with him again. I was breathing hard now, my chest heaving, and my hands balled into fists. I was clenching them so tightly that my knuckles were white. I knew she could see the fury in my eyes, but I wasn't done. You've denied me your body and your heart for almost 2 years. You denied me your love and affection for even longer, and to make it worse, you gave it to someone else. You did things with him that you never did with me, things you denied me. You gave him parts of you that you said were too much to try with me. You betrayed me not just with infidelity, you betrayed my rights as your husband. You gave my rights to someone else. You and your mother had this planned. I know she never liked me, but what I don't understand is what your mother had against his wife and children. She must have known that Margaret might find out and that his marriage would be destroyed, but she didn't care. She didn't care about your marriage or his. She's always hated me, and she led you down the path of betrayal without a second thought, and you followed her without a whimper. It was too easy for you, Jamie. Too easy for you to betray me and our marriage. That shouldn't have been the case. It shouldn't have been so easy, and that's why I knew it was over. That's what convinced me that there is no love left in this marriage. You just recognized it first. I had to find out the hard way. Jamie jumped up and crossed the distance between us, reaching for me to hug or hold me. I wanted none of it. I slapped her arms away and stepped back. Stay away from me. I want nothing to do with you. Just leave me alone. Jim, please, you can't mean that. No, I won't stay away. I love you, and I won't give you up. I will walk away from you if you try to touch me again. Giving up on this marriage is no longer your choice, Jamie. You threw that away when you went to that motel with Walter Matthews. You slammed the door shut when you stayed with him that weekend and planned to do it again. This time, there is no longer any love in my heart for you. You've killed all of it with your betrayal. Jamie fell to the floor, both hands holding her head as she listened to my words take away her life as my wife. She was still Jamie Parker, but she would never again be Jamie Schwann, wife of Jim Schwann. That role was over, and I had already made plans to take my name back. I had already set those wheels in motion. What she didn't yet know was how I planned on addressing her lover. I had planned on being out of the house before this, but things got a little rushed. They'll sleep in the spare room until I move out. You better stay away from me and don't talk to me. Janet is aware of everything, so she'll understand. Jamie didn't seem to be listening, so I went upstairs to move my things into the spare room. I would pack most of my stuff later, but I needed some things now. When I went into the bathroom to get my supplies, I saw the ring still hanging where I left it. I looked at it and walked away, letting it stay. A few days later, I was sitting in the den, working on a few papers I wanted to make sure got filed as soon as possible, when the phone rang. Since I wasn't sure if Jamie was home, I reached for it. I must have picked it up at the same instant Jamie did because I heard her say hello in a quiet, subdued manner. To my surprise, it was Walter Matthews. I wasn't aware he called here. I covered the mouthpiece and listened. Jamie, it's me, Walter. What's going on? Walter, I told you never to call me here, and I told you I never wanted to see you or talk to you again. So why are you calling? Did you know that your husband has filed suit against me in court for alienation of affections? He filed it in Cleveland. He had me served at home in front of my wife and kids. He subpoenaed my wife. He's suing me for $1 million. He's what? Oh my God. I knew he found out, but I didn't know he would go this far. I heard a smothered laugh before she continued. I'm sorry, Walter, but it's out of my hands. Guess you'll have to tell your wife now, won't you? Guess your broken marriage is really going to be broken up now, you deceitful person. After the lies you told me about your broken marriage, your hated wife, your pending divorce, you deserve this, so go to hell. She slammed the phone down while he was still yelling. I listened until he finally gave up and then put down my receiver. From what I heard, it sounded like old Walter and Ruth cooked up a plan and sold the bill of goods to Jamie, and she was naive enough to fall for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Too bad she was too willing to be led by the nose by both her mother and her lover. Too willing to turn her back on me and our marriage. Too easy. That was the problem. Just then, Jamie walked in. looked at me with a sad expression on her face, and then said, "You had this all planned out, didn't you? You were just waiting until you had it all in place before confronting me. I've been married to you for almost 20 years, and I can't believe I forgot your motto. Give them maximum pain and make it hurt for a long time. I guess you're going for the maximum with Walter. How about me? What do you have planned for me?" "For you? Nothing, Jamie. I found I really hated what Walter did to me, even if you were partly responsible. He knew better. He has a wife and 5 kids, and he's involved with my wife. He's going to pay as much as I can get, and I've offered to pay Margaret for her divorce if she chooses to go that way. Maybe if you play your cards right, you can marry him when she kicks him out. You know better. I don't love him. I don't even like him right now. He lied to me about everything. He and my mother. I hate her, and I hate him." She looked at me with that look she always used to get what she wanted. "Can't you forgive me and let me make it up to you? I'll never do anything like this again. You know that. Please, Jim, let me make it up." "Sorry, Jamie. You had your chance, and you made your choice. Like I said, it was way too easy for you to walk away from me. Too easy by far. You made your choice, and it was the wrong one." I put down my papers, turned off the desk light, and stood. She took in the suit and tie and freshly polished shoes. I was dressed to go out, and she saw that. "Don't wait up for me. I have a date tonight, and I probably won't be back till morning. I had a date with Rachel English tonight. She told me to bring my pajamas, and when I asked why, she just laughed and said it might be fun to see me in the morning, ready for a new day." As I left the house, I glanced back to see Jamie standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes. 5 days later, I met John at a local bar. We had a long discussion about my plans, specifically about the timing of my divorce from Jamie, and we also came up with a new plan for Ruth. 3 days after that, John met me at my office, posing as a client. We had an extensive discussion, and I introduced him to 2 very effective lawyers. After 3 hours, John left, ready to proceed with his part. 5 days later, Ruth was served at her house. Shocked and furious, she charged at John right in front of the process server. The process server immediately called 911, and within 15 minutes, Ruth was in handcuffs, seated in the back of a police car. I assisted John in obtaining a restraining order to keep Ruth away from him for the next 3 weeks, enough time for him to clean out his house and leave. We had arranged for everything John owned to be transferred into a trust fund for my daughter, Janet. Since John had owned the house before the marriage, it wasn't considered part of their marital assets. His financial assets had also been transferred, leaving Ruth with little. John never even had to go to court. The judge, a family friend, made sure the divorce was straightforward, with each party receiving 50% of what they owned. Ruth ended up with a settlement of $10,000. John, by that time, was already in Thailand, and the whole process was completed in 3 months. Ruth now lives in a community retirement home. As for my own divorce, it was a long, drawn-out process. They even tried to suggest marriage counseling, but thankfully, the counselor was also a friend, and his report to the judge was efficient. Having good connections helped smooth the way. After a year, the divorce was finalized. I retained the house and was granted custody of my daughter, Janet. The court asked Janet about her preference, and she chose to stay with me. My ex-wife was given visitation rights, but Janet was distant. Each time she came by, Janet would quickly excuse herself, signaling that she was not interested in rekindling their relationship. Jamie understood she was not welcome. In the last 2 years, Jamie has aged visibly and has started to experience health issues. Meanwhile, I am preparing to marry Rachel, with Janet and Rachel happily planning the wedding together. John is enjoying his new life in Thailand and often calls, sharing updates about his new friends, who vary with each call. As for Walter, he faced significant financial struggles after his divorce. His ex-wife took most of his money, investments, and the house, successfully arguing the financial strain of supporting their 5 children. The judge, a friend, was moved by her story and sided with her. I had offered to help cover her divorce fees. Ruth, meanwhile, still lives in that community retirement home. According to Janet, Ruth spends her days resenting me, blaming me for how things turned out. I suppose karma works in unexpected ways. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.